All right, today we're digging into a really fascinating self-help book from the Netherlands called The Signature of God. And let me tell you, this is not your ordinary book. It's actually framed as a whole training program. And it makes a pretty bold promise to help you completely rebuild your mind right from the foundation up.
So the book kicks things off with this incredibly simple but really powerful analogy. Just think about that for a second. A worm's entire reality is the apple. It's a fantastic hook because it immediately makes you ask, wait, what if my world is just an apple? What if I'm living inside some kind of self-imposed prison and I don't even know it?
Okay, so how does this whole training thing actually work? Well, the book lays out this really clear four-phase journey. It's designed to take you all the way from figuring out what this prison of the mind is to putting your new freedom to a final measurable test.
First things first, the book diagnoses the core problem. The idea is that we're pretty much all living in a mental prison of some kind. But this prison isn't made of iron bars. Its walls are built by what the author calls the old stem, which just means the old voice, that nagging internal narrator of fear, doubt, and all that self-sabotage we know so well.
And here is the absolute key. This isn't about obvious, life-wrecking addictions. The book argues that the most dangerous prisons are actually the subtle, everyday patterns that we've just accepted as normal. Those little habits that are quietly draining our energy and our joy without us even realizing it. And to describe these hidden prisons, the author comes up with this brilliant concept, the face-lifted cell. These are habits that honestly look pretty good on the surface, or at least they're totally socially acceptable, but they're secretly locking you in. Kind of like modern golden handcuffs for your soul.
So what do these face-lifted cells actually look like in real life? Well, we're talking about things like a full-blown addiction to productivity because you feel totally worthless if you're not busy, or, that constant need for approval on social media. Even something like obsessively consuming the news to get this false sense of control. These are the modern, perfectly acceptable cells we can find ourselves trapped in.
But the book doesn't just point out the prison and leave you there. Not at all. It immediately flips the script and hands you the keys by casting you as the hero of your own story. You are the inner engineer.
So the central metaphor here is that your mind is a construction site, and right now it's just cluttered with all the junk left behind by that old voice. As the inner engineer, your job isn't just to clean up a little bit. Nope, your job is to bring in the wrecking ball, demolish that old prison entirely, and start building something completely new on a fresh foundation. And this whole mission, this big engineering project, is structured around three core pillars. First, you've got to tear down the old lies and rebuild your identity based on God's truth. Then you build your freedom by actively choosing to live out of that new identity. And finally, you design your calling. You figure out what on earth you're going to do with all this new freedom.
Okay, so we've got the problem and we've got our new job title. But how do we actually do the work? This is where we get to the core how-to part of the manual. Every single chapter is built on this very specific, repeating, 7-step blueprint, which basically turns each one into a mini training session for your mind.
And what's so clever about this structure is that it's designed to stop you from just, passively reading along. You start with a big idea. You see the damage the old voice causes through a story you can relate to. You hit a turning point where a new perspective comes in, and then bam, you get practical, real-world exercises to do, all anchored in a core biblical truth.
So for example, let's say a chapter is all about fear. It might kick off with a quote just like this to frame the whole conflict. It immediately sets the stage. Fear is basically an imposter that only has power if you decide to open the door and let it in. Then the book gets right into the nitty-gritty, showing you this direct battle happening inside your head. On one side, you've got the old voice, which just loves to magnify fear and trap your focus on all the bad stuff that could happen. But on the other side, you have the turning point. The moment you introduce a new voice that consciously reframes the whole situation based on faith and truth. Now, this whole program doesn't just leave you with a bunch of theory. Nope, it all builds up to a final master test. And this is designed to give you tangible, personal proof that the transformation you've been working on is actually real. See, as you're working through the chapters, you're not just reading. You're actively collecting these little trophies. You're asked to pick 5 essential words from each chapter that represent your personal victories. And by the end, you've built up this personal arsenal of 75 never-again words, which becomes the ammunition for your final test. So this 7-day test is a series of practical writing exercises. You start by really cementing your new identity, then you move on to freedom, and then to your calling. But the real masterstroke, the absolutely brilliant part, comes on day 7.
You're asked to write a short, funny monologue from the perspective of your defeated old voice, using as many of your 75 victory words as you can to make it sound like a pathetic, washed-up liar.
And check this out. For a final touch, completing this whole program is actually treated like a graduation. You literally get a certificate. And this isn't just a gimmick. It's a really powerful psychological tool to reinforce the idea that you haven't just read a book. You've officially become a graduate inner engineer, and you're equipped with a whole new set of skills.
And so the book leaves you with this final, powerful challenge. By making you imagine your old voice as this defeated, pathetic character, you basically rob it of all its power, once and for all. What a fascinating blueprint for actually rebuilding a new mind.